Sometimes the loneliest question in the world isn't asked out loud. It's hidden where no one is ever supposed to find it. The 27th floor of Hayes Technologies overlooked downtown Seattle like a kingdom built from glass and ambition. Morning sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting long golden reflections across polished stone, while executives hurried through the hallway with tablets tucked beneath their arms and coffee growing cold in expensive cups. Every second inside, the building seemed measured, optimized, and monetized. Yet on that particular Tuesday, everything had stopped. Every monitor inside the executive suite had frozen without warning. Security software refused to load. Backup servers rejected every login. 3 senior engineers had already failed to restore the system, and the board meeting scheduled for 11 o'clock was less than 90 minutes away. "Call somebody outside," the chief operating officer finally said. "I don't care who." 40 minutes later, Ethan Brooks stepped through the revolving doors carrying a worn black laptop bag that had seen better years. His jeans were clean but faded. His work boots carried tiny scratches from countless house calls, and the silver wedding band still resting on his finger caught the morning light whenever he adjusted the strap over his shoulder. Few people looked at him twice. To them, he was simply another freelance technician answering another emergency request. None of them knew that before sunrise he had packed his 8-year-old daughter Lily's lunch, braided her hair the best he could manage, smiled through her complaints about math homework, and promised he would be home in time to help her finish building a cardboard solar system for school. Keeping promises mattered more to Ethan than impressing strangers. A young assistant rushed him toward the CEO's private office without ceremony. "Miss Hayes is in another meeting," she explained nervously. "Just fix whatever you can." Ethan nodded once. "I'll take a look." The office itself felt strangely different from the rest of the building. It was elegant, but almost painfully quiet. A bookshelf lined one wall, fresh white. Lilies rested beside a framed landscape. There were no family photographs on the desk, no trophies celebrating success, no reminders that an actual person worked there. Only a sleek computer sitting in complete silence. Ethan carefully connected his diagnostic drive and began tracing corrupted startup files. His fingers moved with calm precision. No emoción, no frustración, just patience. After several minutes, the screen flickered back to life. A hidden folder unexpectedly opened during the recovery process before he could stop it. One photograph filled the monitor. A young woman, years younger than the executive described by every employee downstairs, smiled shyly into the camera without designer clothes, without makeup meant for magazine covers, without the confidence billion-dollar companies could buy. Beneath the picture were 7 simple words. "Do you think I'm pretty?" Ethan's eyes lingered for less than a heartbeat. He quietly closed the window, deleted the temporary recovery cache without opening another file, and returned to repairing the operating system. At that exact moment, the office door opened behind him. Victoria Hayes stood perfectly still. She didn't ask whether the computer was fixed. She looked only at the monitor, then at Ethan's face, searching for something she feared she might already know. And for the first time in years, the most powerful woman in the room wasn't afraid of losing her company. She was afraid that someone had finally seen the question she had spent a lifetime hiding. Victoria did not speak. The silence between them stretched so gently that even the quiet hum of the air conditioner seemed louder than either heartbeat. Ethan lowered his eyes, stepped away from the desk, and folded his diagnostic cable with deliberate care. "The operating system is stable again," he said calmly. "I also removed the corrupted temporary files. Everything should be running normally." Victoria continued studying him, searching for the smallest crack in his expression. Most people who accidentally discovered something personal would react the same way. Their eyes would brighten with curiosity. Their posture would change. They would hesitate just long enough to reveal that they knew more than they should. Ethan did none of those things. His face remained composed, respectful, almost ordinary. "Did you open anything that was not related to the repair?" she asked quietly. There was no accusation in her voice, only caution built from years of disappointment. Ethan met her eyes for exactly 1 second before answering. A recovery window appeared automatically during the repair process. She waited. I closed it immediately. Another pause settled over the office. Outside the glass walls, assistants hurried past carrying folders. Phones rang somewhere down the hallway, and elevators chimed as another executive floor welcomed another busy morning. Yet inside the office, time seemed unwilling to move. Victoria slowly walked toward her desk. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor before stopping beside the computer. She looked at the screen, then at Ethan again. "You could have looked." "I could have," he answered, "but it was not mine to see." She blinked almost imperceptibly. Those 7 words landed with far more weight than any compliment ever had. Respect had become strangely rare in a world where information was treated like currency. Most people would have been curious, she admitted. Ethan smiled faintly. Curiosity solves computer problems. It does not always solve people. For the first time that morning, Victoria found herself unable to answer immediately. She had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without hesitation. She had dismantled hostile takeovers with a single sentence. Yet this quiet technician standing in front of her had somehow shifted the conversation away from technology without sounding clever or rehearsed. Before she could respond, Ethan's phone vibrated gently inside his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and his expression softened in a way Victoria had not yet seen. "Excuse me for just a moment." He answered the call. "Hey, sweetheart." A bright little voice spilled through the speaker loudly enough for Victoria to catch only pieces. "Dad, I forgot the planet's glitter." Ethan laughed under his breath. "Do not worry. I bought the blue glitter before work. It is in the kitchen drawer next to the markers. Mrs. Hernandez will help you after school until I get home." Another excited burst of words followed. "I promised, remember? We are finishing Saturn tonight. I never break promises." The call ended with a cheerful goodbye. Ethan slipped the phone away, almost embarrassed by the interruption. "My daughter," he explained simply. "Victoria Nadif. She sounds happy." Ethan looked toward the skyline beyond the windows. "She makes sure I stay that way, too." Something inside Victoria shifted again. The office around her suddenly felt much larger than it had a minute before. Awards still covered the shelves. Financial reports still waited for signatures. Investors were still expecting answers. Yet the only thing she could think about was the quiet certainty in a father's voice when he told a little girl that he never broke his promises. It reminded her that there were victories no quarterly report could ever measure. The board meeting ended with applause, but Victoria barely heard a single word. Executives congratulated one another for recovering from what could have become a disastrous morning. Investors smiled with visible relief, and assistants hurried to prepare schedules for the afternoon. Through every conversation, one thought quietly remained in the back of her mind. Ethan Brooks had walked in her office, repaired a critical system, stumbled across the most private sentence she had ever written, and somehow left without taking anything from her except a little of her fear. That alone made him unlike anyone she had met in years. By early afternoon, she found herself standing beside the wide window overlooking Elliott Bay, watching ferries glide across the gray water while clouds drifted lazily above the skyline. Success had surrounded her with people who always wanted something. Some wanted promotions. Others wanted investments, introductions, influence, or recognition. Even compliments often carried invisible price tags. She had learned to recognize them almost instantly. Respect without expectation had become so unfamiliar that she barely remembered what it felt like. She pressed the intercom button. "Megan, could you come in for a moment?" Her executive assistant appeared almost immediately with a tablet in hand. "Yes, Miss Hayes." Victoria remained looking toward the water. "The technician from this morning. Ethan Brooks." Megan nodded. "His invoice has already been submitted." "That is not what I asked." Megan hesitated. "Would you like me to process an additional payment?" Victoria slowly turned around. "No, I would like to know who he is." Megan looked slightly surprised. "You mean professionally?" "Everything that is publicly available." The assistant gave a polite nod before leaving the office. Less than an hour later, she returned carrying a thin folder. Victoria expected impressive credentials or a long list of corporate contracts. Instead, she found something remarkably ordinary. Independent information technology consultant. Former senior systems engineer. Left a prestigious technology firm 7 years earlier. No lawsuits. No scandals. No interviews. No social media presence beyond photographs of hiking trails and birthday cakes decorated for a little girl named Lily. The final page contained a single newspaper clipping from years ago recognizing volunteers who had restored computers at an underfunded elementary school. His name appeared near the bottom of the list in small print. No photograph. No quotation. Victoria stared at the article longer than she expected. He never mentioned any of this, she asked quietly. Megan shook her head. Most people probably would have. Victoria smiled faintly to herself. Apparently, he is not most people. Across town, Ethan unlocked the front door of his modest craftsman home just before sunset. The familiar scent of tomato soup and fresh bread filled the kitchen. Lily came running from the dining table with blue glitter sparkling across both hands and even a little on her nose. Daddy, Saturn has rings now. Ethan laughed warmly as she proudly held up the cardboard solar system hanging from a wooden dowel. Some planets leaned slightly crooked, and tiny silver stars had been glued wherever she found empty space. To Ethan, it looked perfect. I told you we would finish it together, he said. Lily wrapped her arms around him. You always keep your promises. He smiled without realizing that, several miles away, a woman surrounded by glass walls and billion-dollar decisions was quietly wondering what it must feel like to trust someone enough to believe those same words again. 3 days passed without another call from Hayes Technologies, and Ethan assumed the emergency had become nothing more than another completed job in a long list of ordinary service requests. His mornings returned to their familiar rhythm. Coffee before sunrise. Lily reminding him not to forget her science project. The quiet drive across Seattle while soft rain painted silver lines across the windshield. Life felt steady again, and Ethan preferred it that way. Late Thursday morning, his phone rang just as he finished replacing a failing router at a neighborhood bakery. The caller identification displayed Hayes Technologies. He answered calmly. This is Ethan Brooks. A familiar professional voice replied. Good morning, Mr. Brooks. This is Megan from Hayes Technologies. Miss Hayes is experiencing another issue with one of the executive systems. She specifically requested you. Ethan frowned slightly. Was the repair from Tuesday unsuccessful? No. Everything is functioning perfectly. This is a different matter. Ethan glanced at his afternoon schedule before answering. I can be there in about 45 minutes. When he arrived, several employees recognized him and greeted him with noticeably warmer smiles than before. Word had quietly spread that the freelance technician had restored the executive network when everyone else had failed. Ethan simply nodded politely and followed Megan toward the private office once again. Victoria was standing beside the window with a tablet in her hands. She turned as he entered. Thank you for coming back. What seems to be the problem? Ethan asked. Victoria placed the tablet on her desk. The synchronization between my desktop and secure archive keeps disconnecting. Ethan sat down and immediately began checking system logs. Everything appeared surprisingly normal. Network traffic was clean. Storage integrity remained intact. Security certificates were valid. The issue took only a few minutes to identify. One automatic synchronization setting had accidentally been disabled after a recent software update. Ethan restored the configuration and verified each connection twice before leaning back. Everything should remain stable now. Victoria looked at the monitor but did not approach. That was quick. Ethan smiled politely. Sometimes computers just need someone to notice the smallest setting. She folded her hands thoughtfully. People are rarely that simple. Ethan saved the final report without looking away from the screen. Sometimes they are. We just spend too much time looking for complicated answers. A quiet silence settled between them once again. Outside the office, conversations drifted through the hallway. Elevators chimed softly, and distant keyboards created a steady rhythm beneath the gentle hum of climate control. Victoria finally broke the silence. Would you have told anyone? Ethan turned toward her. About what? She held his gaze. What you saw the other day. He answered without hesitation. No. Why not? She asked. Ethan closed his laptop with a soft click. Because trust can be broken by accident just as easily as on purpose. Either way, someone still loses it. Victoria lowered her eyes for only a moment before looking back at him. Something inside the carefully guarded walls she had spent years building shifted almost imperceptibly. Every consultant she had hired won a larger contract. Every executive expected another opportunity. Every stranger seemed eager to gain something from knowing her. Yet this man continued to leave with nothing except payment for honest work. As Ethan gathered his tools, Victoria made a decision she could not fully explain even to herself. Mr. Brooks. He stopped at the door. Yes. Her voice softened in a way no employee had ever heard before. Would you be willing to have coffee with me after work someday? Not as my technician. Ethan looked genuinely surprised, then answered with the same calm sincerity that had marked every conversation between them. If it is simply coffee, I would be happy to. Saturday arrived wrapped in soft autumn sunshine, and Seattle seemed to move at a gentler pace than it did during the workweek. Ethan parked his aging pickup truck outside a quiet neighborhood coffee shop overlooking a small park where children chased one another beneath tall maple trees, painted with shades of gold and crimson. He checked his watch before walking inside. Being on time had become another promise he refused to break. A few minutes later, Victoria entered wearing a simple navy sweater, blue jeans, and white sneakers. Without the tailored business suits and commanding presence that usually surrounded her, she looked surprisingly approachable. Several customers glanced at her briefly before returning to their conversations, never realizing one of the most successful technology executives in the country had just stepped through the same door they used every weekend. Ethan stood as she approached. Good afternoon. She smiled, and although the smile was small, it reached her eyes in a way it never had inside the executive office. Thank you for coming. They ordered coffee and found a quiet table beside the window where sunlight danced across steaming mugs. For a few moments, they simply watched people outside, enjoying the afternoon. There was no board meeting waiting. No malfunctioning computer demanding attention. Just two strangers discovering that silence did not always have to feel uncomfortable. Victoria finally spoke first. I realized something this week. Ethan looked at her with calm curiosity. What was that? She wrapped both hands around her cup before answering. I know almost nothing about the man who reminded me that respect still exists. Ethan smiled gently. There is not much to tell. She laughed softly. People usually say that right before telling an interesting story. He shook his head. I grew up in Spokane. I studied computer engineering. I got married young. My wife, Emily, believed every problem had a solution if people were patient enough to look for it. His voice remained steady, but there was unmistakable warmth whenever he spoke her name. When Lily was 1 year old, Emily became seriously ill. She passed away several months later. Victoria lowered her eyes, offering quiet respect instead of sympathy that might have sounded rehearsed. Ethan continued after a brief pause. After that, climbing the corporate ladder stopped mattering. Lily needed a father more than another company needed another engineer. So I left my executive position and started working independently. The income became less predictable, but my time belonged to my daughter. Victoria listened without interrupting. She had expected sacrifice. She had not expected peace. Do you ever regret that decision? She asked. Ethan looked through the window where a little girl was laughing while trying to teach her father how to skip across a line of painted stepping stones. Every night Lily tells me about her day over dinner. Every birthday, I help decorate the cake. Every school concert, every science project, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, I was there. No promotion could have given me those moments back if I had missed them. Victoria felt something tighten gently inside her chest. She had spent years believing success demanded constant sacrifice. Yet sitting across from her was a man who measured wealth in memories instead of numbers. Before she could answer, the front door burst open and a cheerful voice filled the cafe. Daddy! Ethan turned just in time to see Lily running toward him with a bright smile, her backpack bouncing behind her as Mrs. Hernandez followed close behind. Lily stopped beside the table, noticed Victoria for the first time, and grinned with the fearless honesty only a child could possess. Are you my dad's new friend? Lily climbed onto the empty chair beside Ethan as though she had known Victoria for years instead of seconds. Mrs. Hernandez smiled apologetically. I hope we are not interrupting. Lily insisted on showing her father the ribbon she earned today. Ethan accepted the small blue ribbon with unmistakable pride. First place in the science presentation. Lily nodded enthusiastically. The judges liked Saturn the most because of the glitter. Ethan laughed softly. I knew those rings would make the difference. Victoria watched the exchange in quiet amazement. She had attended award ceremonies worth millions of dollars, yet none of them carried the genuine joy filling this little corner of the coffee shop. Lily suddenly turned toward Victoria again. Daddy says it is polite to introduce people. I am Lily Brooks. Victoria extended her hand with a warm smile. It is very nice to meet you, Lily. I am Victoria. Lily shook her hand without the slightest hesitation. You have pretty eyes. The unexpected compliment caught Victoria completely off guard. She had spent years hearing polished remarks about her intelligence, leadership, and success. No one had spoken to her with such innocent sincerity in a very long time. Thank you, she answered quietly. Lily tilted her head with childlike curiosity. Why do you look surprised? Ethan gently cleared his throat. Lily, what? She asked innocently. I'm just asking. Victoria smiled, this time a little more naturally, because people do not usually say things that honestly anymore. Lily considered that answer for a moment before replying with complete confidence. Maybe they should. Mrs. Hernandez excused herself to run an errand nearby, promising to return within half an hour. Ethan thanked her, and soon the three of them remained together by the window. Lily eagerly pulled colored pencils from her backpack and began sketching planets across the back of an unused paper placemat. After several minutes, she looked toward Victoria. Do you want help? Victoria hesitative. I'm not very good at drawing. Lily shrugged. Neither am I. That is why it is fun. Ethan quietly watched as Victoria accepted the blue pencil and carefully colored a tiny circle. The billionaire who negotiated international contracts without blinking suddenly seemed almost nervous about staying inside the lines of a child's drawing. Lily smiled brightly. See? You're good already. Victoria laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even herself. Nearby customers briefly looked over before smiling without knowing why. The sound carried something light and unguarded that had been missing from her life for years. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through amber leaves outside, Victoria realized she had not checked her phone in nearly an hour. No stock prices, no emails, no investor messages, just laughter, colored pencils, and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee. She looked at Ethan, who was watching Lily with quiet pride rather than trying to impress anyone around him. Then she looked back at the little girl, who had already drawn 3 smiling planets holding hands across the page. Who are they? Victoria asked. Lily answered without looking up. Friends who did not know they needed each other until they ended up in the same sky. Victoria felt those simple words settled gently inside her heart, and for reasons she could not yet explain, the lonely question she had hidden for so many years suddenly seemed just a little less impossible to answer. The drawing stayed on the table long after the coffee had grown cold. 3 smiling planets floated across the paper beneath a sky filled with tiny silver stars, and for reasons none of the adults could fully explain, it felt more valuable than anything hanging inside the headquarters of Hayes Technologies. Mrs. Hernandez returned a few minutes later, but even she noticed something different. Victoria no longer carried the guarded expression she had worn when she first arrived. Her shoulders looked lighter, and every so often she found herself smiling at Lily without even realizing it. Before leaving, Lily carefully folded the drawing in half and held it toward Victoria. This one is for you. Victoria blinked in surprise. Are you sure? Lily nodded with complete certainty. Daddy says if something makes you smile, Sometimes you should let someone else keep it. Ethan smiled quietly. I might have said something like that. Victoria accepted the little drawing as though it were made of glass instead of paper. Thank you, Lily. I will take good care of it. The little girl grinned proudly before skipping outside with Mrs. Hernandez toward the park across the street. Silence returned to the table, but this time it felt warm instead of uncertain. Victoria looked down at the folded paper resting beside her coffee cup. Children have a way of seeing people that adults forget. Ethan nodded. They usually notice hearts before they notice titles. Victoria slowly traced one finger across the edge of the drawing. I used to be like that. Ethan waited without interrupting. She took a slow breath before speaking again. When I was in high school, I was painfully shy. I was taller than most of the girls, awkward, and convinced there was always someone prettier standing beside me. One day, I liked a boy enough to ask him a question that felt enormous at the time. Her voice softened almost to a whisper. I sent him a picture of myself. Ethan remained completely still. Under the picture, I wrote 7 words. She looked out the window, where autumn leaves drifted gently onto the sidewalk. Do you think I am pretty? The breeze outside carried a handful of golden leaves across the park while distant laughter floated through the afternoon air. Victoria continued without looking at him. He answered with one word. She paused for several seconds. No. She smiled sadly, not with bitterness, but with the quiet acceptance of someone remembering an old scar. It sounds small now, but when you are 16 years old, one word can become the voice you carry for decades. Ethan did not rush to fill the silence. He understood that some memories deserved room to breathe before anyone tried to comfort them. Victoria finally looked back at him. I worked harder than everyone else after that. I built companies. I won awards. I became successful enough that magazines started calling me beautiful. She gave a faint laugh that held no joy. The strange thing is that I never believed any of them, because I still trusted the opinion of one frightened teenage boy more than the truth standing in front of me. Ethan's eyes reflected nothing except quiet understanding. There was no pity, no surprise, and no attempt to rescue her from her own story. Only respect. For the first time since they had met, Victoria realized she no longer feared that he knew her secret. Instead, she found herself hoping he would stay long enough to help her believe that one careless answer from the past did not have to define the rest of her life. Monday morning arrived with gray clouds hanging low above Seattle and the calm that had settled over. The weekend disappeared the moment Victoria stepped into the executive conference room. Faces around the long walnut table looked unusually tense. Large screens displayed flashing warning messages instead of quarterly reports. The chief technology officer spoke first. Our secure collaboration network is experiencing repeated interruptions. Nothing has been compromised, but every few minutes another critical service disconnects before recovering again. Another executive added, if we cannot stabilize it today, several major client demonstrations will have to be postponed. Victoria remained composed, but she recognized the growing anxiety spreading around the room. This was no ordinary software glitch. It was unpredictable, subtle, and becoming more disruptive with every passing minute. Have all internal teams reviewed the system? She asked. Twice, the chief technology officer replied. Everyone has a different theory, but nobody has found the root cause. The room fell silent. Victoria looked through the glass wall toward the city skyline before making a quiet decision. Call Ethan Brooks. Less than an hour later, Ethan arrived carrying the same worn laptop bag and the same calm expression. Several employees greeted him with genuine respect, but he accepted every welcome with a modest smile before following Megan into the operations center. Multiple monitors filled one wall with streams of network activity flowing across colorful diagrams. Engineers explained everything they had already tested while Ethan listened without interrupting. He asked only a handful of simple questions. When did the first interruption begin? What changed immediately before it? Which system has never lost its connection? His voice never became louder than necessary. Instead of searching for dramatic explanations, he quietly observed the smallest details everyone else had overlooked. After nearly 40 minutes, he leaned back from the keyboard. The problem is not inside your servers. Several engineers exchanged confused looks. Ethan continued. A recent automatic update changed how one external authentication service renews encrypted session keys. Your systems are healthy. They're simply waiting for the wrong answer. He adjusted several security settings, restarted one gateway, and watched the network stabilize almost immediately. One by one, the warning messages disappeared. Green status indicators slowly replaced the red alerts covering the display wall. The operations center grew remarkably quiet. Finally, the chief technology officer let out a relieved breath. That is it. Everything is stable again. Victoria watched insecurity. There was no celebration in his face, no satisfaction at proving everyone else wrong. He simply documented every change, verified the recovery twice, and closed his laptop. You should not experience the issue again, he said. Victoria asked softly, what do we owe you? Ethan handed the report to Megan. Only the standard service fee. Several executives looked at one another in disbelief. One quietly remarked that another consultant would have charged several $1,000s for an emergency response of that importance. Ethan smiled politely. The work does not become more valuable because people are worried. It becomes more valuable when it is done honestly. Those words lingered in the room long after he walked toward the elevator. Victoria remained standing beside the conference table, realizing that the greatest thing Ethan had repaired that day was not another computer system. Little by little, without asking for recognition, he was restoring something she had almost forgotten could exist inside the business world: quiet integrity. 2 weeks later, the annual Hayes Technologies Leadership Gala filled one of Seattle's most elegant waterfront venues with soft music, warm lights, and conversations that echoed beneath crystal chandeliers. Executives, investors, community leaders, and employees gathered to celebrate another successful year. Yet Victoria found herself paying very little attention to the speeches prepared for the evening. Hidden inside her evening bag was the folded drawing Lily had given her at the coffee shop. The paper had become slightly worn around the edges because she had looked at it more times than she cared to admit. 3 smiling planets still floated beneath tiny silver stars, reminding her that some of life's greatest gifts arrived without invitation. Across the ballroom, Ethan stood near the back wearing a simple navy suit that fit comfortably rather than impressively. Lily stood beside him in a pale blue dress, proudly pointing toward the desserts while quietly reminding her father that she would wait until after dinner, exactly as he had taught her. They looked completely at ease despite being surrounded by some of the wealthiest people in the city. Victoria watched them for several moments before walking across the room. Conversations gradually softened as guests noticed the chief executive changing direction. She stopped in front of Ethan with a gentle smile. "Thank you for coming." Ethan returned the smile. "Thank you for inviting us." Lily beamed. "I like the little lights on the ceiling. They look like stars." Victoria glanced upward. "I was thinking the same thing." A few minutes later, the master of ceremonies welcomed Victoria to the stage. She thanked everyone for another remarkable year, spoke about innovation, teamwork, and responsibility, then paused. The ballroom grew unexpectedly quiet. "There is one more person I would like to recognize tonight," she said. "Not for building this company, but for reminding me what kind of people should build every company." She looked toward Ethan. Hundreds of eyes followed her gaze. "Please join me." Ethan hesitated before walking to the stage with his usual calm dignity. Victoria reached into her evening bag and unfolded Lily's drawing for everyone to see. A warm ripple of laughter spread through the audience at the smiling planets. "A few weeks ago," Victoria said softly, "a little girl gave me this picture. I thought it was simply a child's drawing. I later realized it was a lesson." She turned toward Ethan. "Your daughter unknowingly reminded me that people should be seen before they are judged, and you reminded me that respect is not something we earn through success. It is something we choose to give." She took a slow breath. "There is something I have wanted to ask you ever since the day you repaired my computer." The ballroom became completely silent. Victoria looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "Do you think I am pretty?" No one moved. No one whispered. Ethan smiled with quiet kindness. the same steady expression that had never changed from the day they first met. "I think you spent too many years asking the wrong question," he answered gently. Another pause settled over the room before he continued. "Pretty is something people notice for a moment. Beautiful is something they discover through character. Every person who truly knows you will eventually forget what you look like, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Victoria, the most beautiful thing about you is that you are finally allowing someone to see your heart instead of your accomplishments." Tears gathered in Victoria's eyes, not from sadness but from relief. Beside the stage, Lily smiled as though she had expected that answer all along. She quietly walked forward, slipped one small hand into Victoria's hand and the other into her father's. Beneath the warm lights of the ballroom, surrounded by applause that seemed to fade into the distance, Victoria realized the lonely question she had carried since she was 16 no longer needed an answer. It had finally found peace.